For constructing our project today, we will be using medium weight chipboard. I like to purchase 12 by 12 sheets of this kind of chipboard, and I'm purchasing it from Amazon. I will do my best to include the link to the specific product down below. For today's project, I will need 5 of those. I don't want you to be intimidated by the complexity of the project, because it's really not difficult at all. The only thing that it requires is time, as a matter of fact. Besides chipboard and glue and scissors and some really basic tools that I'm sure most of you already have, since all of us are crafters, there might be some pieces of metal hardware that you will have to purchase in addition to what you might already have. And the metal hardware pieces include 2 of the metal hinges. Then we will need 2 sets of the this is called a swing closure, as far as I know, and they're widely available both on Amazon and on eBay, and you can also purchase them from AliExpress. This is how the back side of each one of the parts of the lock looks like. What's really important for creating the handle are these D-rings, and we will need 2 of them, and they measure in inches about 1 1/8. These are already optional things. Like, I have this label holder, I have this brass handmade label. I also have this pull with a ring on it that I want to use on one of the inner compartments of the suitcase. This piece can be replaced either by 1 D-ring or 2 D-rings, that depends on how you will want to do it, or even this piece can be replaced by a ribbon, and I will talk about it later on in the tutorial. And here are some, I think these are called like picture hooks or something of that sort. And I have 3 of them here. I'm still not sure if I will use them. Besides all of these, we will use brads, little metal brads for attaching the hardware to our chipboard suitcase. I would also like to refer to the question of cutting the chipboard, how to do that and what to use, what kind of rulers or what cutting tools. So I have this acrylic ruler, and this one is from Martha Stewart, and this specific ruler was produced in 2007, so it's it has been my friend for quite a long time. Then I cut the chipboard using the retractable knife. I am not sure that I can call it a craft knife, but this is how it looks. And there are lots of different kinds. I have also this one, but it's a little bit heavier than this, so I usually end up using this one, and it is by Scotch. So I like to snip the tip of the blade before I start to work on a new project, because that ensures that the blade is really sharp, and then I don't have to apply too much pressure when cutting through the chipboard layer. I guess you could also use craft knives that look like this and have smaller blades, you need to have a self-healing mat under your chipboard piece when you cut it. And you don't really have to apply too much pressure as far as the cutting goes. You will just align your ruler along the lines that you will sketch prior to cutting with your pencil, and then you will just go along each line a few times till you feel that you reached the surface of the healing mat, and then you just separate two of the pieces as soon as you cut them apart, and then your pieces are ready to be used. So I hope this is helpful for some of you who might not have been doing anything like that before. At the same time, I'm sure that this will not be a problem for most of you guys, since you already prepare covers for your journals, and I'm sure you have found the way of cutting chipboard which is convenient for you. So just go ahead and keep on doing what you are doing. Back to our measurements. I have 5 sheets here of the 12 by 12 medium weight chipboard, and I have tried to work on the layouts that could be effective for positioning the elements of the suitcase. I will make sure to include the measurements for all the parts of the chipboard suitcase in my blog post that I will link in the description box down below, but you will also be able to find the measurements in the captions of the video itself. I will cut everything out and then get back to you. I have cut out all the chipboard elements, and you can see that there is quite a lot of them right here. We will start our project with just 5 pieces for now. That means that you will have to go through the pile of the chipboard pieces that you have and choose 2 that measure 9 3/4 by 2 inches. 2 other ones which measure 6 3/4 by 2 inches, and then you will take the suitcase bottom part, which is 9 5/8 by 6 3/4. And if you will look at this piece, you will notice obviously a guideline which stands 3 3/8 of an inch away from the right hand edge of the chipboard piece. So that's what we need for our first step in this project. We will be connecting the chipboard pieces with the help of the paper strips. The brand that I like to use for my projects is the one from Joann, and it's the Park Lane Papery brand. I went ahead and cut 2 sheets of the 8.5 by 11 papers to 1 inch wide strips. So they're 11 inches long by 1 inch wide. We will start with, oh yeah, and I forgot to mention that each one of the strips that I have here is scored along the long side in the middle, which means at 1/2 inch. And I will, each time as needed, take a structure strip, fold it first, and reinforce that fold using the bone folder. And then I will tell you on which side of the strip you have to apply either score tape or wet glue in order to proceed. So I am using this Korean brand score tape. It is 1/4 inch wide or 6 millimeters wide. It's a very strong tape, double-sided tape, and I love using it for constructing all of my paper projects, the choice of the double-sided tape is very important here if you want your project to last. To begin with, we will take 2 strips of paper, and they're already folded in half. So I will now take them to my paper trimmer and cut them to 6 3/4 of an inch long and get back. Okay, both of them are here. Now I will apply score tape to 1/2 of the hinge to the inside of it, if you look at it like that. So I will apply score tape to this flap of the paper hinge right here. When you apply the score tape, please make sure that you don't cover the fold itself, that you add that strip of score tape just along the fold. Okay, and then once you have that done, you will take the scissors and trim just a tiny bit the corners of this strip like that, and make sure that when you cut up to this corner, you don't cut off from the length of the hinge, because we really need it to reach all the way from one chipboard corner to another. Next, I will take one of the strips, remove the backing from the tape, and I like to keep them half folded like that, and I will glue each one of those paper strips to the narrower, to the shorter edges of the suitcase bottom panel. That's what we have right now. Then, as a matter of fact, we could do it earlier as well, but next I will apply score tape to the second half of the hinge on both sides as well. And as you can see, I am staying just a hair away from the fold. Okay. Now I will take one of the side panels, the short ones, remove the backing from the tape on the flap, and place the chipboard panel at a straight angle right next to the large chipboard piece, this one, like that, very close, like flush with the large chipboard piece, like that, making sure that the corners at both ends meet. And then while I keep this all together with my fingers, I will lift the flap of the hinge and burnish it with my finger, and then use the bone folder. Burnish even more when you unfold, and then you will notice that you will have a gap right here between the two pieces, and this gap is equal to the thickness of the chipboard that you are working with. And now let's do the same on the opposite side. This is what we have for now. Now let's get back to the panels right here. For attaching those, we will need, again, 2 strips of craft cardstock, and these will measure 9 3/4, okay, just like this. So the length is the same as the length of the panels, and I will apply score tape to both halves of the paper hinges. Remember not to cover the fold line with the tape. Then fold it in half, and again miter the corners, making sure that you don't cut off from the length of the paper strip. I will take the first strip and remove the backing from one half of it, and I will glue it down to the chipboard panel, making sure that the chipboard panel reaches right up to that fold line. Make sure to burnish on the back, and do the same with the second chipboard panel and the second paper strip. Next, we will attach those to the opposite long edges of the suitcase bottom. And to find a perfect placement for that, you will do this. You will remove the backing from the flap of the hinge, and then you will fold one of the panels. So I like to use the panel on the left hand side, and then while I keep these together at a straight angle, I will attach this piece right next to them, making sure that once the pieces are connected and this flap is glued down to the base of the suitcase, this panel covers the one at the bottom like that. And once I have the angle perfectly formed here on the side, I will make sure that I catch the bottom piece of the chipboard with that adhesive on the score tape, and then I will make sure that the other corner is perfectly formed on the opposite side as well, and press a little bit with my finger here to catch that panel at the bottom as well on this side, and then unfold and burnish. Okay, and just making sure again that the corners are fine. So that's what you need to have. When you will try to fold everything together, you will need the long panel to cover the edges of the short panels, like that. Okay, so let's do the same on the opposite side right here. That is done now. Before we proceed and apply some hinges to the inside of the suitcase bottom, I want you to take a ruler and a pencil and extend that guideline that we have from the base of the suitcase to the long panels, just like that. Super easy. So you will have them on the panels right now and on the section which will serve as a suitcase bottom. Next, you will need 4 more hinges. 2 of them will measure 6 3/4 inches, and 2 more will be 9 5/8. You will fold each one of the strips in half and apply score tape to the outside of the paper strip, making sure that you don't cover the fold. And next, as usual, you will miter the corners of each of the paper strips and glue them down flush with the edge of the chipboard piece, which is in the center. Short hinges to the short sides. And long hinges to the long sides. And this is what you'll have. Okay. Next, I want you to take 2 strips which are 4 inches long by 1 inch wide, of course, and apply score tape to the inside of the paper strip, and then cut each one of those in half at 2 inches long, like this. Then miter the corners of each one of those tiny strips. Next, we will take one of those strips at a time, remove the backing from 1/2 of the hinge, and apply those to the edges of the long panels. I'm making sure that I'm not covering the fold and that this hinge can be freely folded and form a straight angle of 90 degrees. Once we have completed that, we will set this piece aside for a couple of moments and get to the piece which will be the divider attached to the bottom of our suitcase. The divider piece measures 6 5/8 by 2 3/8. We will also need a few structure strips of different sizes, and I will talk about it right now. So 3 strips that I have here measure 6 5/8, and one of them has score tape on the inside. Remember not to cover the fold and to miter the corners of the paper strip. 2 additional strips measure the same, 6 5/8 long, and they have score tape on the outside, and I again mitered the corners. Then 2 smaller hinges will measure 2 3/8, and they will have the score tape on the outside. And 2 last hinges will measure 2 inches long, and they will again have the score tape on the outside. So how to assemble this right now, you will ask. And I will tell you. We will start with the ones which are 2 inches long, and I will remove the backing from only 1/2 of that hinge, and I will attach it to one of the shorter edges of the chipboard piece, like so. You will see that it doesn't reach all the way to the opposite corner, and that's fine. You just have to make sure that it is attached flush with the edge. You will flip this piece to the back side and attach the second 2-inch hinge again in the very same way like the first one, flush with the edge of the chipboard, making sure that they start at the same corner. And then you will use the 2 3/8 inch long hinges and attach them flush with the edge of the chipboard on the opposite side. Now, this section with 2 short hinges will be attached to the suitcase bottom to the panel, which will then have the hinges. Next, I will take the long hinges that we prepared, and I will take the backing off 1/2 of it, and I will apply these to the edge of the chipboard, which is right here. So you will have that piece which is not covered with anything at the top, and you will apply the hinges to the bottom section of the chipboard piece, again flush with its edge. Flip it over and apply the second hinge the same way. Burnish, and then once you have that done, let me show you how this looks. You will take the last hinge, remove the backing from 1/2, and start attaching it to the section of the chipboard which is still not covered with paper, from corner to corner. Burnish, remove the backing from the tape on the second half of the hinge, and here I like to add just a little bit of wet glue along the edge of the chipboard right there, and that's because I want the top edge of the divider that will be showing and visible to you or anyone who will be using the suitcase. And it just adds a nice touch because that edge is so crisp and looks super professional. So that's what I like to do. Okay, we have our divider ready. In order for you to understand better where exactly and how to attach this divider to the bottom of the suitcase, I will mark the placement of the metal hinges that we're going to attach later on, so that you know exactly closer to which panel of the suitcase bottom the divider needs to be attached. If the hinges will be on that panel, you will take your divider and make sure that this uncovered corner is facing the top and is further from you. Okay, and you will then remove the backing from 1/2 of the bottom hinges, and you will glue it down just like that. Only that part of one hinge will be glued down. The rest of the hinges are still not connected to any panel of the suitcase bottom. Okay, next we will take care of the sides and the corners. So I will ask you please to choose a corner. Any corner is fine. You will remove the backing from the small hinge and you will form again the corner, making sure that the long panel covers the short one. Form a straight angle, and while you hold all this with your hand, you will burnish on that flap with your finger, and then use your bone folder to burnish further. And just like that, one corner of our suitcase bottom is done. So you will do the same with the remaining corners. This is what we have right now. We can now go ahead and remove the backing from those hinges that we have on the inside of our suitcase bottom and attach them just like so, making sure you burnish. So I like to start from the short panels first and then take care of the longer ones. Perfect. Next, we will remove the backing from the short hinge right there on the side where the hinges will be and attach it. I am looking right now at that guideline that I have and I'm trying to align everything in there and then attach the hinge. Make sure to burnish using your bone folder. Then just keep on removing the backing from the hinges and connect them to the panels of the suitcase. Now I will take care of that hinge at the bottom. And the bottom of our suitcase is now almost complete. What's left is only to cover the top edges of the chipboard with some more paper pieces, and also to reinforce the inside corners of our suitcase. So let's start with that. Actually, you will need 4 hinges that measure 1/16 of an inch less than 2 inches on the long side, and you will put them right in the inside corners of the suitcase bottom. You will fold them in half as usual and have the score tape on the outside of the hinges. To apply them, you will remove the backing of the score tape all at once and add some glue, some liquid glue, right into that seam in each one of the corners, and then glue the hinges in like so. All the inside corners are reinforced. I want to stress the fact that this part of the divider is still not connected to the panel of our suitcase bottom. Just make sure you are not rushing to glue it down. Next, you will need 2 hinges which measure 6 3/4 of an inch long. You will fold them in half and apply score tape to the inside of the hinges like that, and miter the corners. Then take the first one, remove the backing from 1/2 of the hinge, and start applying it to the panel right here, but not from the very corner where this panel begins, and only from where this chipboard panel starts, right in there, so it doesn't reach all the way to the corner right here. Okay, it only covers the section of the chipboard which is 6 3/4 of an inch long. That's what we need to do. Burnish, then unfold the second half, remove the backing off the tape, and as usual I like to add that little amount of liquid glue on the edge of the chipboard. Burnish before you fold in and glue down. Burnish on the inside as well. Make sure you have a nice crisp edge at the top, and do the same on the opposite panel right here. Like that. Next we will need 2 more hinges, and they are the last ones for the bottom of the suitcase, and they will measure 9 7/8 of an inch. We'll always be able to trim them down if needed, but we'll start with that measurement, 9 7/8. I have the score tape on the inside. I have each hinge folded in half, and I have also mitered the corners. So I will start with the hinge that I will attach to this side. I will remove the backing from 1/2 of the hinge, and I will start to attach it to the outside long panel of my suitcase, making sure that I start all the way from the corner and get to the opposite corner right there. And as you can see, there's a bit of overhanging on this side, and that's what I was talking about. So you will use your sharp paper scissors and just trim that excess off, and then burnish. Okay, Now you will fold the hinge in without gluing it down just yet, and just press with your fingers there in the corners, and then when you unfold the hinge back, you will see how further you need to trim that second half of the hinge in order for it to fold in nicely. Okay, just like that. So I will unfold it, remove the backing, and add some liquid glue right in there, as we did before. And then I will burnish on top and fold it in and glue everything down. Burnish again to create a crisp edge. Now let's take care of this side right here, and we begin the same way as here. We remove the backing from one half of the hinge and start attaching it from the very corner of the long panel in there. I make sure that I align the hinge along the fold line and along the edge of the chipboard. Once again, I will trim that excess off on that side and make sure I burnish. Okay, now I will flip this like so and cut a bit from this side of the divider and that side of the divider, and then I will just cut that little triangular section off and keep on folding the hinges inside the usual way, making sure that I remove the backing and add the glue. And then just use your bone folder to flatten the paper in that area where you have a little triangular section cut out. And now our bottom piece for the suitcase is complete. The next part I will not film on video because it will basically be the replay of this section, but without the divider piece. So you will use the same measurements for the hinges on the inside and on the outside, exactly the same thing, just without attaching and adding the divider for creating the top section of the suitcase. So we have now identical two parts, and we can next create the so-called lip that will help to keep our suitcase together. For that step, you will take 3 pieces of chipboard that you have. The long one will measure 9.5 by 2 3/8, and 2 short ones will measure 5.5 by 2 3/8. You will also need 2 pieces of cardstock that measure 11 inches long by 2 inches wide, and they're scored in the center along the long side, just like that. We will use them for building something that looks like this. And I have this piece from the second suitcase that I'm working on, so I can show to you how this lip is going to look eventually. We will also have a few hinges here on the inside to connect 3 of the pieces together, and the long strips of paper will go along the top edge of the lip and will also connect 3 of the panels together. So let's take the long panel of the so-called lip and mark the center. It will be at 4 3/4 of an inch. I will take one of the 11-inch strips that I have prepared, and I will match the mark that I created there on the chipboard piece with the edge of the chipboard and flip it to the back side, and just trying not to move it. It's not very important. I will just mark up to where I need to apply some glue, only to 1/2 of the hinge right now. I will then glue my chipboard piece to the paper in there, and then I will do the same with the second paper strip, matching it with the edge of the previously applied paper strip and just marking the area up to which I need to apply the glue. Next, I will take any of the 2 remaining pieces for constructing the lip and put it down on the right-hand side of the paper section that I have, and will roughly mark up to where it reaches on paper. Then remove that and apply glue to this section right here. I'm using wet glue for this purpose. Then I will take this second piece of the chipboard and use it as my guide for leaving the needed space between 2 of the chipboard pieces in there. And then I will burnish and glue the chipboard piece down to the paper. And I'm just aligning everything along that fold that I have created. Here I will do the same, and since I don't have the second piece to use as a guide, I will just get the same chipboard from the scraps or from the pile of the remaining pieces that we will use for the suitcase. I will once again mark up to where I need to apply the glue and repeat the same steps on this side. Now I will trim the corners right here at an angle from this side and at an angle from this side. The same thing from the opposite corner. And then in these areas where the paper needs to be folded, I will cut triangular sections so that I can easily fold the paper in here, okay? But before I really glue everything down, I will need 2 more hinges that will be 2 3/8 of an inch long, and I will glue them down in these folds. The hinges will have the score tape on the outside, and as usual you will miter the corners on both sides. So I will take one of those hinges and remove the backing from 1/2, and then apply the hinge flush with the edge of the central piece of the chipboard, just like so. Burnish each time, and next you will either use liquid glue or score tape to glue down these paper sections to the chipboard, only in the center for now. Once you do that, you will add the glue to these little flaps on the sides and glue them down to the chipboard. Next, you will remove the backing from either of the short hinges that you have and fold the shorter section up like so at a straight angle, as we always do, and glue down the hinge in there. You will see that when you try to fold this flap in, you'll just shape it with your fingernail and cut at a wider angle right in there to make sure that it folds nicely. Trim off the excess paper that you might have and apply the glue and fold it in. And repeat that procedure again on the opposite side. This piece is now ready, but we are not ready yet to attach it to the suitcase. I just want to show you that it will go inside here, and you might want to apply some strength in order to put it into its place. This is how it will look like once ready. And this slip will support the suitcase from the inside when you close it. It's even kept nicely and tightly together right now, even before I attached any locks to it. So that's already nice. Next, we will create that pull-out section that will be at the top of the suitcase. And we'll kind of create a compartment for your larger journal if you will want to create one, or for different tags or ephemera pieces that you will want to hold inside this suitcase. So for creating that compartment, we will need a few additional pieces of chipboard, and the pile of the chipboard pieces that we have created gets smaller and smaller, which is kind of nice. So for creating that compartment, we will need 5 pieces of chipboard. The largest one is 9 3/8 by 6.5. 2 longer ones are 9.5 by 1.5, and 2 shorter ones are 6.5 by 1.5. The process of connecting them together is absolutely the same as the process in which we created the top of the suitcase and the bottom of the suitcase. So I will only give you the measurements of the hinges that you will need in order to glue to each one of the sections, but I hope the whole process in itself is quite self-explanatory, and you are already professionals in it, since it is the 3rd piece in this project that you create in this manner. The only thing that I want to stress before we continue are these diagonal lines that I have on the largest chipboard piece right here, and I basically drew the lines from one corner to the opposite corner, and the same on this side, and at the intersection of those lines I just poked the hole to mark the center where I will later on attach either a pull or a piece of ribbon or another kind of something that will help me to remove this compartment from the top lid of the suitcase. Okay, so first two hinges that you will need will be 6.5 inches long. The next pair will be 9.5 inches long, and the score tape will be on the inside. Next four hinges will be 1.5 inch long, and they will have the score tape on the inside. Next set of hinges will be 6.5 inches long and have the score tape on the outside. Don't forget to miter the corners each time. The next set of hinges will be 9 3/8 long. Now, when you are attaching these hinges, you might have seen me trimming them just a little bit. That's because they need to fit right in between the folds of the hinges on the sides. So if there are just tiny overhangings of the longer hinges in there, you will have to trim them off. Next, we will assemble our compartment together by gluing down the corners. And then you will glue down the inside hinges to the side panels of the chipboard pieces. Next four hinges will be just 1/16 of an inch shorter than 1.5 inches, and before attaching them, remember to add the wet glue into the seams of the corners. Our next set of hinges will have to be 6.5 inches long, and they will be attached right here. And the very last two hinges for completing this compartment will have to be 9 5/8 of an inch long. Now our pull-out compartment is ready, and I have a hole right here in the center, if you remember, so it will fit inside the lid just like so, and it's quite tight in there, so to pull it out again you might want to use a ruler and pull it out just like so. But I think we did a pretty awesome job. Let's measure now each panel of the suitcase and cover it with the designer papers. I will be using the papers from Vectoria Designs for my project, so I will do my best to post the measurements for each one of the paper pieces in the subtitles section of this video. I will speed up the whole process of gluing the pieces down to the panels because this is something that each one of you knows how to do, so I don't feel like we have to waste any time on that. So just look for the measurements and let's cover it with paper. I have cut some of the designer paper pieces for embellishing the suitcase, and I also distressed all of the edges with a vintage photo distress ink. I distressed the edges, both of the designer papers and all the parts of the suitcase that I have prepared for now. So this is the pull-out compartment, and these are the parts of the suitcase itself. So I distressed all the corners, all the edges, and everywhere where I could get with the distress ink tool. I reached and distressed the edges of everything. Now I am ready to embellish the parts of the suitcase with the designer paper, and I will start with this pull-out insert. First, I will cover the front with this paper design. Right after gluing this piece down, I will flip the compartment to the back side of it, and I will re-poke that hole that I had in the chipboard, and I will transfer it to the Vectoria Designs paper right here, and that will be just a reminder for me that I need to add that pull right here. But I will do it a little bit later. I will continue with embellishing the sides of this compartment. I will be using this design with the leaves for my long panels as well as the short panels. So the papers for the long panels will measure 1 3/8 by 9 3/8, and then the pieces for the shorter panels will measure 1 3/8 by 6.5. Here we go. Since I'm not adding any metal pieces to these sides, I can embellish them on the inside of the compartment as well. So here I will use different papers this time, and two of the short pieces measure 6 3/8 by 1 3/8. I will glue them down right here, and the pieces for the longer sides will measure 9 1/4 by 1 3/8, and I will glue them down right here. I will be using this ring pull on the front of the pull-out compartment, and I will need that hole to be wide enough to accommodate these tails of the pull. So for enlarging the hole in here, I will use a bunch screwdriver, which looks like this. This is a cheap one from AliExpress. I think it's called a Japanese screwdriver. At least this was the name of the item that I purchased. I know that Martha Stewart had a similar device, which looked like this. So either one of those is fine. The principle of how they work is the same. If you don't have any of those, I think an awl might do the job as well, and it all depends on the hardware that you're going to use for your project. So whatever hardware you have which you think is good for this purpose, use it and just find a way to attach it. The way it works is like that. You attach it to where you want the hole to be, and you push till you punch through all the thickness of the chipboard and the paper and get the opening in there. So now I can place that pull inside the opening and flip it to the back side, secure it in there, make sure that the tails are flat. I might use a little hammer to flatten them down, and then once that is done, I will use a piece of painter's tape to cover the tails of that pull on the back And I will now cut another piece of paper, which is 9 1/4 by 6 3/8. And this is the design that I'm going to use. I distressed the edges of it, and I'm going to glue it down on the inside. And just like that, we have completed and covered with paper our pull-out compartment. Next, I will cover all the outside panels of the top of the suitcase. For the larger piece right here, for the top of our suitcase that will be visible, you will choose any paper that you like. And this piece measures 9 5/8 by 6 3/4. Then to embellish the longer sides, you will need 2 pieces of paper that measure 9 5/8 by 1 7/8. And I usually like to cut these papers so that the design continues from one piece to another. Let me move this aside and show you once again, just like that. So I will glue this one down to the top right here, and I will take now the bottom of the suitcase and glue this piece down right here, so that when the suitcase is closed, that design, as I mentioned, continues from the bottom of the suitcase to the top. There we have it. Now I will flip it to the other side and take, once again, 2 pieces of paper which measure 9 5/8 by 1 7/8. And once again, that's the design that continues from one paper strip to another. You still need to embellish the short sides of the suitcase, and for that I will need, again, 2 pieces that measure 6 3/4 by 1 7/8. And again, that's the design that continues like this. And then you will need a pair of additional papers for embellishing the short panels of the suitcase on the opposite side. And again, they are 6 3/4 by 1 7/8. And here we have it. So the outside of the suitcase has been covered with paper. We still have the bottom here left, so I will flip it like so. And I decided to cover the bottom of the suitcase just with a plain piece of craft cardstock. So this one measures 9 5/8 by 6 3/4. And you can see here that I have guidelines which are 3/4 of an inch away from the outside edges of this paper piece. And then at the intersection of the guidelines, I poked the holes, and that's because after I glue this piece down to the chipboard, I want to add some brads instead of the feet, just to raise the suitcase a little bit above the surface that it will stand on, and to prevent this bottom from being scratched. So I will glue the paper piece down to the chipboard. And now, since I can see where exactly the holes are in the cardstock, I will re-poke them and go with the poking tool through both the cardstock and the chipboard. And then I will take this part aside, and I will add my brads in there. I can go ahead and flatten those tails of the brads in there. Next, I have here 2 pieces, and these are just some scraps. So each one of them measures 1 1/4 by 1 7/8. And I will glue these pieces down in there. And you can see that our lip is not reaching all the way to the back of the bottom of the suitcase. So these paper pieces have to be glued down in the corners right there before we will glue the lip down to the bottom of the suitcase. Since I know how I want to embellish the sides of my suitcase, I have already prepared 2 pieces of craft cardstock, and as you can see, I distressed the edges. So 2 of those measure 2 3/4 by 2 3/4, and I also prepared 2 pieces of the designer paper, and these measure 2 5/8 by 2 5/8. I will glue them together. Each square will have tiny border all around like that. And for these pieces, it's better to choose the non-directional paper, since now we will cut each one of them into 2 triangles, and we'll do it like this. Each one of those triangular pieces will be glued down to the short panels of the suitcase like this. And we just need to find the middle of that panel, since it is, and I'm taking the designer paper piece as my guide. It was 6 3/4 of an inch long. That means that the center will be at 3 3/8. So I can either mark it with the pencil and then erase the mark, or I can eyeball it. You can do whatever you feel is more convenient for you. So I will now glue this one to the top of the suitcase, and then I will use that piece as my guide to glue the second triangular piece to the bottom. So it will look like this, and I will do the same on the opposite side, like this. Next, I would like us to attach some metal parts to the suitcase, and I am talking about the swivel clasps and the hinges that will definitely keep our suitcase together, closed. So these are the parts that I'm going to use. For attaching the hinges, I will use some small brads that I have right here. To attach the swivel clasps, though, I am going to use the tiny fasteners from Tim Holtz, and that's because the tails of those are significantly longer than those of the brads that I have right here. You can see the difference, and we will need those longer ones because, as you can see, the swivel clasp is quite thick on its own, and it needs to go also through the layer of chipboard and paper and be able to be secured on the back side. So all that length of the tails of the brad will be used and necessary. So that's something I wanted to point your attention to. The hinge will be placed so that its middle will be right above the seam of two parts of the suitcase, and you can decide if you want to attach them closer to the edge on the right hand side, or maybe a little bit further from that edge. In any case, with these hinges, I think I am going to attach them about 1.25 inches from the edge of the suitcase. So I will start poking holes for 1/2 of the hinge at first, and then once I attach that 1/2, I will go ahead and attach the second one. One is done. Now let's put the second half of the suitcase back, just for the support, not for anything else. And I will now align both parts together and place the second hinge again about 1.25 inches away from that edge now. It's time to mark the centers of the holes for each one of the hinges at their bottom part. Okay, so the hinges are now connected to the suitcase. Now it's time to take care of the closures in the front. The clasps will also be attached 1.25 inches away from the edges of the chipboard right here. So I will first, as usual, mark the centers of the holes and poke them. I will use the brads with longer tails for attaching the clasps, but the process is the same. And when you secure the tails on the back of the clasp, on the inside of the suitcase, once again, just make sure that they will stay parallel to the edge of the chipboard, and that's because we want to cover all of them with the layer of paper that we are going to attach in there on the inside. And if you're not attaching these parallel to the edge of the chipboard, they might show. Okay, now our suitcase has the closures and the hinges, and on the front of it I want to attach this label holder that I have in here. So I will just eyeball where it should be. I will again poke the holes, and this time I can already use the smaller brads for attaching this label holder, because there is only one layer of chipboard in here and the label itself is very, very thin. These are all of the metal pieces that I planned to attach at the front and at the back of the case. I can take that lip that we have put aside until now, and I can mark up to which section of it the glue needs to be applied. So I will just put it back into place, make sure that it reaches all the way to the bottom, and I will just draw a line using the piercing tool, and then when I will take it out, I will see that sketched line right in there. For gluing this piece to the suitcase, I will use just the wet glue. And I am ready to slide it back in. Remember that it needs to go between the divider and the panel of the suitcase itself. Okay, just like that, making sure that there is no glue leaking out. And now I can just press with my fingers and keep both of the layers together and make sure that it is glued down nicely. Remember that this piece is not attached yet to that lip that we just installed. So since it's attached on this side and at the bottom, it is already pretty straight. But just have a look and see that it is straight indeed when you attach the hinges on this side permanently to the suitcase on this side. Now I think it's right about time to work on the handle for our suitcase. And to create the handle, we will need a few pieces of paper. Let me move the suitcase aside, take the scoreboard, and give you the measurements for these paper pieces that we will use for creating the handle. So this is the craft cardstock, the same as the one that we used for creating all of the hinges in paper hinges in our project. It measures 8 inches long by 2 7/8 wide. On the shorter side, it is scored at 1 inch and 2 inches. And on the long side, it is scored at 1 inch and 7 inches. We will also need 2 additional pieces of craft cardstock, and these will measure 2 inches by 2 1/8. So 2 1/8 by 2 inches. On the 2-inch side right here, we will score this paper piece at 1 inch. And on the side, which is 2 1/8 of an inch, we will score it at 3/4 and at 1.5 inches. Now we can take the scoreboard away and work with these pieces right here. So first of all, once we assemble the handle, it will look like this. Okay, so this will be the part that we will attach in the center. And before I fold everything in and glue it down, I want to add a few elements to this central area right here. So first of all, I have here a piece of the same craft cardstock that I colored using the Vintage Photo Distress stain. I don't think it is sold anymore, but maybe you can find some on eBay or Etsy or places like those. If you can't find it or don't want to look for it, I think you can go ahead and use the Distress ink just to color this whole piece. And then what I did to make it shiny, I just covered it with a layer of Mod Podge, and that's how it looks right now. So this piece here measures 7/8 by 5 7/8, and I will glue it down right in the center of this cardstock piece right here. It will be glued down right along the score lines in the center with a little border all around. Next, to add some more interest to the handle, I created this label using my sewing machine. Turns out it can stitch the letters of the alphabet, so I chose to stitch Herbal box right here. So to create the label, I just layered a piece of paper and covered it with a piece of muslin. And then once I had what I wanted stitched on the label, I just wrapped the edges on the back of that paper piece. Now I want to first of all glue this label down to this layer of cardstock in order to stitch the label more securely to the paper layer. And I will stitch right along the edges of the label itself and get back to you. Okay, so now it looks like that. And this label for sure is not going anywhere right now. And for some more interest, I want to add just 2 tiny brads right here. And I will do that before sealing the handle together. And now I am ready to glue the first flap down. And as you noticed, one flap will be shorter than the other. This flap, for example, reaches all the way to the score line, and this one is slightly shorter. So I will start gluing the handle with the shorter flap. Glue it down like so. Okay, and then next you will add the glue to the second flap and seal the handle closed like that. I will distress the edges of the handle and take my D-rings next. Put the D-ring behind the side flap of the handle and apply glue to the flap itself, and then just glue it down like this. Make sure you leave it to dry. Now let's get back to these paper pieces that we have right here. So as well, one of the flaps is shorter than the other. So you will glue the shorter flap down first and then cover it with the one which is wider. And now they are ready, and I went ahead and distressed the edges of both of them. Then in the same way that I created this dark brown layer of paper for the large section of the handle, I created a piece of paper for the smaller ones, and this paper strip is 5/8 of an inch wide. The length is less important because I only need 2 little pieces to cover only one section of this paper strip right here. So it needs to be 7/8 of an inch long. So let me cut 2 pieces of this paper piece and get back. I glued each one of those paper pieces to the craft cardstock thick pieces that we have prepared like this. Now if the glue is already dry, you will be able to nicely fold those in half and distress that edge if needed. Okay. They're very thick, so just make sure you use your bone folder in order to burnish. Okay, now these will be glued down on top of the D-rings like so, and you might want to pull each one of the paper pieces towards the sides, just to make sure that the paper shapes itself around the outline of that D-ring. And once you have that done, you will again add some liquid glue to the inside of the paper, and we'll glue it down. The handle is now ready. I went ahead and marked the holes for attaching the handle, and let me tell you where those holes are. So let's measure from the top edge of the lid. They are 3 3/8 of an inch away from this edge, or about 8.5 centimeters. And then, I have the hole in the same place in here, 3 3/8 of an inch away from the top edge of the lid. And both of the holes also stand 1.5 inch away from the left and the right hand edge of the suitcase lid, which means that they're about 3.8 centimeters away from those edges. Now I will poke the holes in these tiny paper pieces which we have on the handle, and I think I need them to be, as a matter of fact, I can use my poking tool for that and not the punch. They will be about 1/4 of an inch away from the edge, and I can eyeball the center of this piece. The same thing here, 1/4 of an inch away from the edge and somewhere in the center. Okay. Now I will take 2 brads, and these are just some smaller ones in here. I will slide them through the hole. Let's start with one hole first, and I will add some glue to the back of this paper piece, and then put the brad through the opening that I have in the lid. Oh, good thing I noticed that it's not the right edge. It's not the right flap of the handle that I'm gluing down. Okay, so this one should be right. I will keep it down and press on top of it with my finger. It would even be a good idea to open the suitcase and just press the layers together, and also flatten the tails of that tiny brad like so. You can go ahead and attach the other side of the handle right now, and by that your suitcase lid will be finished. Next, I would like us to work on the paper layers that will cover the inside panels of the case. And I have already cut the papers that I'm going to use. As soon as the glue dries on the paper layers that you attached to the lid of the case, you can try to put in the pull-out insert, and you might feel that it goes a little bit tight in. In my case, it is the same thing happening, but after a few times that you put it in and pull out, it will work better and easier. And when you put your journal or little other pieces that you want to store inside this compartment, it will pop right out. So I just want you to know about that. And right now we will create those little match boxes for storing the printed seed envelopes, or maybe the seeds themselves. For creating each one of the boxes, you will need 2 pieces of paper. One will measure 7 1/4 by 2 7/8, and you will score this piece on the long side at 1 inch, 3 1/8, 4 1/8, and 6 1/4. The second piece will measure 6 3/4 by 7 1/2, and on the short side you will score it 3/8, 1 3/8, 2 3/8, 4 3/8, 5 3/8, and 6 3/8. On the long side, you will score it at 3/8, 1 3/8, 2 3/8, 5 1/8, 6 1/8, and 7 1/8. Now let's get back to this piece. I folded it along the score lines and used my distress ink to distress the edges of this piece. To embellish it, I will need a piece of paper, a designer paper of your choice, and it will measure 2 inches by 2 3/4. I also went ahead and stitched around the edges of this paper piece, and I also prepared 2 pieces of simple brown colored cardstock, and both of them measure 7/8 by 2 3/4. So I also distressed the edges of 2 of these pieces. So to glue this down, I will just fold it flat like so and apply the glue to one of the narrow flaps, and then making sure that both of the pieces meet and form a nice looking edge. I will use my bone folder just to burnish it down and glue this piece together like so. And then I can keep it flat and take one of the brown cardstock pieces and glue one down to this panel right here, and then fold it the other way and glue the second piece right here. And this is what we have so far. Now I will take this piece and glue it down between the 2 brown cardstock panels. The sleeve for our matchbox is ready. So let's create now the drawer. We will get back to the second paper piece that we have scored. I have used my pencil to sketch the cut lines that we will need to create here on this piece. And I know you can not see that very good, so let me cut all the unnecessary pieces out and get back to you with the piece which is ready to assemble. One thing that I want to mention before I start using my ruler and craft knife for cutting these pieces out are the score lines right here. So when you cut, for example, this section out, I want you to cut the score lines off as well. Just like this. So if you look at the piece of paper that I have right here, and I think you can see the score line that goes all the way from this corner to the bottom, I will be trimming the score line off so that it stays on the piece that will later on be discarded. Let me show you. Here we will cut at an angle. Here, for example, on that 3/8 of an inch flap, I will cut at an angle up to the score line, and then I will be cutting that score line off just like this. The incorrect way of doing that will be cutting along the score line like that, and you can see that the score line on this piece is being left there, which is not what we are striving for. So I want to cut that score line off as well. That way your box, once assembled, will look really professional and neat. And this is how the cardstock piece, once you trim all the corner sections, will look like. I also want you to pay attention at the flaps that we are leaving. The flaps will be located at the top and at the bottom of the long side and not the short one. So once again, maybe pause the video if you need to and have a look at this piece once again to make sure that you cut it right. Now we are ready to assemble our drawer. So first of all, I will just reinforce all the score lines. The way we assemble this is like that. I will fold the flaps on the short panels in and apply glue onto them, one side after another, and then I will start to form nice corners. And you can fold or unfold the panels of the box the way you feel is more comfortable for you. Then on this side we'll do the same thing. Then I will apply some glue to just a little bit to the wider flap and to the narrower flap, and fold this in like so. Then the opposite side, and then two of the longer opposite panels. And this is what you'll have at this stage. If you are using distress ink for the edges, go ahead and do that now. Distress the edges of this drawer piece. Then to cover the bottom of the drawer, I will use a piece of paper which measures 1 7/8 by 2 5/8, and I will just use my wet glue to glue this piece right here. You might need to center it because it is a little bit smaller than the actual bottom of this drawer piece. you can slide the drawer inside its sleeve, and it looks absolutely cute. And you can add those tiny adorable seed envelopes inside this box. So according to my plan, 3 of such boxes would fit perfectly well into this compartment right here. And I will probably embellish them just a little bit more to accent them better.